Hello out there, Revere, and welcome to our Revere veterans and community. By the way, we have a real special guest today. He's a professor of law at Northeastern University. Before I ask you the first question, Mr. Enrich, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming from Northeastern School of Law. Could you just tell us a little about yourself, how you first got involved, and what made you interested in law, and then we'll go into the
Well, what got me interested in law? I've always been interested in government and how government can make life better for people, and that led me to go to law school, and then I actually worked in Massachusetts state government. I worked when Mike Dukakis was governor. I worked for one of his cabinet secretaries and had a wonderful time doing really exciting work for the state. And then after working for him for 8 years, decided to become a professor, and that's what I've been doing since then.
I bumped into Michael Dukakis. Would you believe that he used to ride the subways to go to his office?
He still does ride the subways.
Even to this day?
Yeah, he teaches at Northeastern too, and I see him on the subways often.
Fantastic. Now I would like to get into what we're here for, sir. We have a casino trying to come to Revere and Everett.
Right.
The people of Revere voted twice. They voted for it yes the first time. They voted more yeses the second time. There are people in this Commonwealth that would like to overturn it. Now, if people do something that is truly democracy, voting yes, can other people, if they wish, just come along out of the blue skies and say, we're going to overturn it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is really complicated. And I guess the place to start, and interrupt me and let me slow down when that's helpful, but I think the place to start is, what's the relationship between the state government and city governments? And at least in Massachusetts, the state gets to set the basic rules, and then cities get to make decisions within those basic rules. So if the state says that no one can buy tobacco unless they're at least 18, the city of Revere can't say, well, somebody who's 16 can. The city can say somebody can't until they're 20 if they want to. They can be more restrictive, but they can't permit things that the state has forbidden. One of the things the state gets to...
Can I just ask you one question?
Sure.
If there's a conflict, not between federal and state, but between city and state. Right. The state has the authority?
The state has the authority. In Massachusetts, different states set that up different ways.
You mean the law isn't the same in all 50 states?
That's a matter of the state constitution. And in some states, the state constitution says if a city chooses to do something in a certain way and the state law is different, the city law governs at least on certain kinds of topics, on topics like local regulation of something like tobacco. Could be a local community could choose to have a different set of rules, and the state doesn't get to dictate. In Massachusetts, the state is the basic decision maker. So take an issue like gambling, right? For years and years and years, certain kinds of gambling have been permissible in Massachusetts. Racetracks, the state lottery, a few other special categories, but basically casino gambling has been illegal in Massachusetts. That's the state's prerogative, and as long as the state said no gambling, then no city could decide we want to have a casino.
But I would like to ask you this question. If you say the state can pick and choose who they gambles, where is the democracy in it? For example, we have a lottery here. Mm-hmm. And I think before we went on the air, you said it was around 50 years ago that they
Something like that, yeah.
Yep. If they can have a gambling for the lottery, how can they not, how can they deny other gambling like the casino?
Yeah. Well, I guess the short answer to where's the democracy there is the people who make those decisions are people who we get to elect, right? And if we don't like the decisions they make, then we can vote them out of office. Now, Massachusetts has another interesting feature. If we don't like the things that our elected officials are doing, Massachusetts is one of about half the states that has something called an initiative power, which says the citizens can put a question on the statewide ballot, and if the citizens vote for it, then it becomes the law. It trumps what the legislature has done. So,
can I be a devil's advocate on that one?
Yeah.
Revere has 54,000 people.
Yeah.
We voted yes. Boston, I believe, has 700 or almost 1 million people in there.
Right.
So if Boston decides they don't like what Revere does, they can go get their people together and just put their whatever they want on the ballot.
Well, actually, at least within certain limits, they can. I mean, the story that I'm always reminded of here, back 15, 20 years ago, there are a number of cities in Massachusetts that had rent control. Boston did, Cambridge did, Brookline did, I think a couple of other cities may have. And those cities had all voted over and over again that they wanted to have rent control. They thought it served the interests of their communities. But a bunch of people from outside those cities put a question on the statewide ballot to outlaw rent control. And it passed. It didn't pass in Boston or in Cambridge or in Brookline, but it did pass statewide. And the result was that those cities could no longer have rent control. Now, again, you want to ask the question, is that democratic?
Right.
It's a really hard question, right? In a sense, we're saying the state should be able to make certain decisions and they should apply statewide. I mean, it would be crazy for each city or town to be able to make its own decisions about sort of what the basic criminal laws were or about when something was a contract. That would be crazy, or what you needed to do to make your will valid. You want those kinds of things decided by at the state level to apply similarly to everyone. Other things you really want to be decided at the local level. Sorting out which should be done where, it's one of the real challenges of state constitutional law.
Let's say Massachusetts says gambling is legal, and I want to build a casino right here in Revere. They say, go ahead, build the casino. The legislature, I go before them, they say, go ahead, build the casino. And I put in $1 billion. The next legislature comes along. Now, before they came along, I have a legal and binding contract with the Mohegan Sun, let's say, with the Suffolk Downs, legal binding, and we go ahead and we start construction. And we're spending already $300 million. The next legislature comes in, and because they voted against it, they can overturn us.
It's a perfect question. And the answer, there are really two parts to that. There are two principles that are going to be sort of in conflict with one another. One principle is you can't have a situation where one legislature can make a rule and then no one can ever change it again. So one legislature's decisions can't determine what all future legislatures can do. That's the one principle. The other principle is when private businesses have acted in ways that have relied on what the legislature has done and what the rules are, can the next legislature then change the rules in ways that deprive those businesses of their investment? And both the federal Constitution and the state Constitution set some limits on how much a future legislature can take away rights that have been earned by a business under current law. And in fact, in the question of whether the voters can take away the right of Revere to have its casino, that's exactly the issue that's in controversy. So what happened is, after the process to get casino licenses was underway, and after Mohegan Sun had spent a great deal of money and paid a big fee to the state to review their license, then a bunch of citizens, and you need like 70,000 citizens around the state, signed a petition and said, we want to put a question on the ballot to once again outlaw all gambling. The question is, would that now take away contractual rights that Mohegan Sun has already earned?
Okay.
That's the question.
Then my question is still on the casino, sir.
Yeah.
Mohegan Sun put up a lot of money, but let's say they had to put up $400,000 to the state to get the license so they could go ahead and do what they're doing.
Exactly.
Now the next legislature comes along, and let's say they revoke it. Does the state give them back the $400,000 of money they put up? Because that was the deal that they made.
Another good question, and probably if the legislature were to change the law and terminate that licensing process, Mohegan Sun would have a pretty good argument that they were entitled to compensation and to get their money back. in the case where it's a ballot question that's been proposed, ballot questions can't appropriate money. That's one of the limits on what citizens can do through the ballot. They can't spend taxpayer money. So the question, the initiative question that was written that may be on the ballot next fall doesn't provide any compensation to Mohegan Sun or to any of the other, I think there are about 8 or 10 other license applicants in other parts of the state.
Right, well, there's only 2 now, Everett and Revere, with Mr. Steve Winter.
Well, I think there are others in other parts of the state,
too.
and
Plainville. Plainville just got a license.
Yeah, and the applicants, the license applicants, have argued if this ballot question were to go on the ballot and were to pass, it would be depriving us of our contractual rights. And the state constitution says you can't have a ballot question that deprives people of their contractual rights. So the Attorney General had to look at this and had to decide, is this a question that's allowed to go on the ballot or not? What she's decided is, no, it can't go on the ballot, because if it were to go on the ballot and if it were to pass, it would deprive them of their property rights. Now, the group that's supporting the ballot initiative has now gone to court and is arguing the Attorney General was wrong. Really, they didn't have any property rights at all. It's not too late to take away the opportunity for a license to be granted. The arguments are very balanced. I mean, it's very hard to know how the courts are going to decide this question.
Could it be similar to that? I hope I got this correct. A few years back, there was a 5% tax that we had. To increase the tax, and they let it ride, so nothing went ahead on that. So in other words, even if the people do want it, but the legislature just lets it fade out, can they do that?
I'm not quite sure what you're thinking. If a question does go on the ballot,
right,
and gets passed by the voters,
the legislature must rule on it?
It takes effect. The legislature doesn't have to do anything. It becomes the law. So, for instance, a few years ago, there was a ballot question to outlaw greyhound racing.
Right.
That passed. Once it passed, greyhound racing was no longer allowed in Massachusetts. The legislature didn't have to do anything. There's a tricky little wrinkle on this, and you may remember this. Back 15, 20 years ago, there was a ballot initiative. A bunch of people, and I think they had a very good idea. They said, we want elections to be, we don't want them to be dominated by private money and rich interests. We think that elections should be publicly funded. And so they put a question on the ballot called the Clean Elections question, which allowed candidates to run using public funding. The legislature didn't like that law. The law took effect. It passed on the ballot overwhelmingly. The legislature didn't like it because legislators often are able to get reelected because they can raise more money from moneyed interests than their opponents can. So they just refused to fund the initiative. So it was the law, but there was no money to pay for it. Question ultimately went to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court said, legislature, you have 2 choices. Either you can repeal the law if you want to, or you can fund it. Those are your only 2 choices. The legislature didn't want to do either. It didn't want to repeal it because that would be sort of admitting that they were going against the will of the people. They didn't want to fund it because they thought it was going to hurt them. It sort of ended in a stalemate. The courts ordered the legislature to raise the money. The legislature didn't raise the money. The court ultimately seized some desks of some legislators and auctioned them off to raise some money, but it was never really resolved. And finally, the legislature repealed the law.
Can I ask you another question,
yeah,
sir, Professor? America's a great country, and we're separation between church and state. The church has bingos. Senior centers around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have their little bingos. That is gambling. Mm-hmm. The casino also is going to be gambling in there. Can the state, without bothering the church or the seniors or the people, the fundraisers, stop gambling on one and not on the other? Yeah. Or they rule it's got to be done equally for all to be democratic?
Well, again, democratic doesn't always mean that we treat everyone the same. At least to me, democratic means that we have a fair process for deciding what the rules are going to be. Right? Again, the rule that says that if you're under 18, you can't buy tobacco. If you're over 18, you can. That's treating people who are under 18 differently than people who are over 18. That's not undemocratic. It may be a good judgment, it may be a bad judgment, but it's been democratically made.
So does every state have to, let's say, every state in the union have the same law that you can't smoke under 18, or is it varies?
Different states have different laws.
So I could go up to New Hampshire, for example, and buy cigarettes and just...
I don't actually know what other states' laws are about tobacco, but it's certainly the kind of thing that states would have freedom to make their own rues. Or a state could say, we're leaving it up to our cities and towns to make their own rules.
The reason I brought that up, Professor, is because I just want to step into the federal government for a minute. They have a ruling. I never done it, so folks, don't blame me. People like to smoke marijuana in some places, which is illegal according to the federal law.
Right.
But 26 states say, okay, you can have marijuana for medicinal purposes or for whatever you want to use it. New Hampshire is going to be the 27th if they pass their...
And 2 states have now said that you can buy marijuana for recreational purposes.
I believe.
Colorado and Washington.
Washington State?
Yeah, Washington State.
Oh, that's perfectly legal?
Well, again...
Wait, is that for medicine? For medicine?
For,
just
for recreational purposes in those 2 states.
If I went to Colorado, I could just go in and say, I want to buy marijuana?
People are going to Colorado to vacation because they
of the
can
marijuana
buy
law?
marijuana there. Yeah, yeah. And some people in Colorado think that's great. Tourism, more people coming to the state, lots of tax revenue from it. But in any case, states are doing that. You're right. It's illegal under federal law. Federal law is, in the words of the Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. So if there's a federal law, that governs. And so even though in Massachusetts it's very soon going to be legal under state law to buy marijuana with a prescription from a doctor, it's still going to be illegal under federal law. Federal prosecutor could come in and prosecute the businesses that are selling, the people who are buying. In this case, the federal government's made a decision. They've said, if a state has a well-regulated process for controlling who has access to marijuana and it's being used for a limited range of purposes, as a matter of policy, the federal government isn't going to prosecute. They could, but they're not going to. So they're making a choice not to. Now again, you're going to say, is that democratic, right? Congress says buying and selling marijuana is illegal. Why? Who gives the Attorney General the power to say, well, we're not going to prosecute if a state wants to allow it? Tough choices.
Right. Someone asked me this question to ask you, one of the residents of Revere. He says, we do not vote on every law that passes. He says, our representatives do vote on us.
Exactly.
And that was the thing that I asked you before. So in other words, one session can overturn the rule of the other sessions.
Right, subject to these limits on intruding on private property rights.
This is a question I hate to ask, but I told him I would do it. And if you can, just skip it. This is asked to me by a veteran, by the way. Why do they allow illegal, now I want to make sure he underlined the word illegal immigrants, not legal immigrants, but people that come across the country illegally. And to our country, when they cannot take care of their own American citizens who were born in this country and the American military. In other words, the way he spoke to me was they want to reduce the American military, what they have at the VA Medical Center, their...
Yeah, boy, that one is way off of my area of expertise. But
but what makes that illegal thing legal? I mean,
well, I don't think that, at least at this point, I'm not inclined to call them illegal immigrants. I'm inclined to call them immigrants who come in without documentation. No one's letting them in. They're coming in around the legal barriers that are in place. And in fact, the United States deports a fair number of those people.
Nobody knows about that, though.
But there are millions of them in the country, and many of them are leading productive lives. I guess I'm speaking just purely personally and not as a
No, the
legal
reason I asked you
expert.
that question, Professor,
Yeah.
like I say, I know nothing about the law, but when I hear the word illegal, how can you make something unless it's changed by law? If it's changed by law,
Well, and Congress is considering making some changes in the immigration status of at least some of the people who have been here for a long time and have been law-abiding and all that. That's easy. But I think the rest of it, it's really, again, it's a question of decisions about enforcement and capacity. I mean, I'd ask whoever it was who asked you that question, I'd ask him, how much public resources would he want to spend to get those, what do we think it is, 12 million people
that many?
out of the country? It's something like that. I mean, no one knows exactly, but it's millions and millions of people, many of whom do important work, are part of how we get a lot of labor provided for a lot of things we need.
Especially out of California and the Farm
Well,
Belt.
and right here in Massachusetts too. And maybe it would be a better place if we had clearer rules about who could come in when. Although I gotta say, I don't know about how long your family has been in this country. My family.
My father came from Germany. My mother came from Russia. So,
How long ago?
I'm 80, excuse me. I'm 85, 86. About 87 years ago, 1928 or 27.
Okay, so by then there were some immigration laws. My family mainly came over in the mid-19th century. And there weren't laws about who could immigrate at that point.
Mine came to Ellis Island. I'm sure yours.
Mine were before Ellis Island existed. So Ellis Island.
What country did you have?
Mainly from Germany and from.
What part of Germany, if I may?
I don't actually know. And one part of my family actually was from Prague,
Czechoslovakia.
So from Czechoslovakia. Yeah. One part was actually
probably the Sudetenland over there.
I don't know. Another part was from the area around Trieste, along the Italian coast, and then others were from parts of Germany. But again, this was in the 1840s. His history has lost it. But boy, I would have hated. I think it's wonderful that your family and my family were able to come here. And I think it's wonderful that there are a whole diverse group of other people still desiring to come here, coming here. There are people with immense energy and creativity. I understand the sentiment that, gosh, if there are laws about it, the laws should be enforced. But once people are here and are productive parts of our society, I don't know, does that make sense to you?
Yep, and I got another good question for you, Professor. If the casino passes, money will be coming in for police, fire department, education.
Right.
I hear a lot of things like I say, I would like to see cameras around the area, especially the high crime districts. A lot of people say Big Brother is watching you.
Yeah.
Is it constitutional? We've caught a lot of criminals on the train, on the subway, the Boston bombers, the bank robbers, all because of cameras. What makes it? Is there any way that people can say it's illegal to have a camera here, here, here?
It's an issue that hasn't really been resolved, right?
It's still pending?
There hasn't been. A lot of this technology is very new. I think the questions that are arising are, to what extent can governments keep that information? Can they store it indefinitely and then use it whenever they want to? Does that invade? Is that invading my privacy? Is that constituting some kind of search or seizure which is forbidden by the Constitution without cause? To what extent? And we're beginning to get some answers to some pieces of this. And again, it varies to some extent from state to state. Massachusetts has just said that the police can't freely put a GPS device on somebody's vehicle to keep track of them. That's beyond the pale. Now, that's very different from just taking pictures. Questions are arising. There's now, the states are storing license plate numbers of every car that passes through a certain intersection. Is that an invasion of my privacy rights for them to?
But it could tell an accident like they show on television where the red lights are, or a lot of traffic is. There's an accident in there, they can see who was at fault, without having someone say it was his fault or his fault.
Yeah, no, and again, this comes back to one of these questions about what we want a democracy to be. We probably could have a lot less crime if we had a lot more power of the police to come into anyone's home at any time and search their homes for anything they might have. It would be a different country, right? Right now we have real restrictions, and one of the things that the Revolutionary War was fought over was the right of people to be secure in their homes.
I always looked at democracy, what's good for me is good for you. My rights are your rights, and your rights are my rights, and there's nothing different between us.
But it's not that simple, right?
No, not according to what I heard.
Right. No, but I mean, even just take this very simple case. Your right to be in a crime-free society depends partly on how deeply we intrude on some of your neighbors' rights to be free of the police coming in whenever they want to and searching their homes for illegal weapons, substances, stolen goods, whatever. If the only searches they ever did were of the homes of people who were committing violent crime, we'd all feel a little better about it. The problem is that some of those searches are going to be of other people, like probably not people quite of your generation, but of people who are perfectly innocent. And this has been a huge struggle in New York City. I don't know if you followed this story about to what extent should the police be free to stop and frisk young men on the streets. Police say that's the way we reduce crime. Young people in those communities say the police are using this in discriminatory ways. They're harassing people of color primarily, but young people in general. They are being very selective and they're being abusive, and that's an intrusion of people's rights. Where do you make the balance?
We got about 3 minutes left. I'd like to ask you one quick question and a
Sure.
quick answer for you. If let's say the opponents overturn the casino, we can go back and say, well, let's vote again, and we'll get another yes answer, maybe a little bit more. They'll overturn it again, and we'll go back and vote again. So this could go around like a ball spinning back and forth.
Yeah, it could. That hasn't happened often.
No, it could.
Yeah. I mean, going to the ballot is a expensive, time-consuming, difficult process, and first of all, it's not clear in this case that this question will ever be allowed to go to the ballot.
Okay.
Even if it does, I think it's quite possible the citizens of the state will say, no, we think that should be up to local choice. We think the present balance is a good one. And if they decide not, boy, it's going to take a lot of political energy and resources for the people of Revere and the other communities that want gambling to go back and say, we're going to open that question up again. Yeah.
Right. So, Professor Enrich, I want to thank Enrich.
Enrich, yeah, exactly.
Thank you for coming down, sir.
It's been
spending
an
a half
absolute
an hour
pleasure.
enlightening the people of Revere. And I always say when I close, God bless you. But thank you most of all for coming down. And I never did ask you, are you a veteran?
No, I am not.
You certainly are a veteran of the community right there. And thank you for coming again. And
My
God
pleasure.
bless you again. God bless the people of Revere, our great city, our troops, wherever they may be, and our great country, the United States of America. And that's why we are a free country, because of people like you, Professor Enrich. Thank you.
Thanks.